Ladies, gentlemen, and nightfarers of all ages, when it comes to Nightreign, there are a few things accepted as constants. We are all weak at the very start of a run, and the paths to power are varied but heavily randomized based on how your expedition goes and what you find. But what if I told you that thanks to the relic system and the way that certain characters work as well inherently, you can get a number of extremely strong setups or builds right out of the gate that make you obliterate enemies in the early levels and gives you a consistent source of power that can scale all the way to the end of an expedition if you don't happen to find anything better along the way. Basically, we are using relics and specific playstyles with our setup to remove the RNG requirement and give you a build that can take out Night Lords with only what you spawn in with, and then of course improving your power through leveling up or finding stuff like weapon passives or good dormant powers. But the idea of the three setups that we'll be going over today is that they require an absolutely minimal amount of effort to get rolling to begin with at the start of your expedition, so you can have a bit more early comfort and speed to begin the run. But also, so all of these setups will be capable of taking down the Night Lord at the end of the run as well, even if you don't happen to find any particularly strong gear. Generally speaking, the mileage will of course vary depending on what you happen to find over your run. You might find a weapon that replaces what we brought at the start if it's good enough, or you might find a dormant power that makes our initial strat and build even stronger than it is by default. But the idea is that these three specific setups will give you an extremely good shot at a successful run on every expedition right out of the gate with consistency. All that said, we've got three builds to go over today, each for a different Nightfarer, and each with a different playstyle in mind as well, to give you some variety to choose between. First up, probably the silliest one, both in terms of how insanely strong it can get, and in terms of what it is, which is the Revenant character, focused around the Wraith calling bell. This is an item that you can use to spend FP and create a vengeful holy spirit that then chases down whatever you were targeting. This item was a fun thing that you could use in base Elden Ring as a game, but in Nightreign, because of how the game functions, it's sort of weirdly strong. It uses a small amount of FP to do a reasonably high amount of damage. You can cast multiple times per second, and the actual damage to FP ratio is quite good. On top of that, it doesn't have any sort of actual scaling stats on the item, so you can technically use it on any character in the game, but Revenant is sort of the best choice, as a character who likes to stay at range as much as possible, but relies on spells for the majority of her own damage because of the scaling she has. This oftentimes puts her in a spot where she is lacking the amount of FP required to get the job done, unless you happen to find some spells with a really good damage to FP ratio. Or otherwise, you tend to rely on your summons, and you may even have to get into melee range a little bit, which is quite dangerous because she is an insanely squishy character, just very low HP. The Wraith calling bell item then solves this in multiple ways. It is a solid damage to FP ratio sort of way of using your resources, it is ranged, and it has a very good sort of tracking to it as well. There are relics that exist of every color type that can roll with an effect that says Wraith calling bell in possession at the start of expedition. You can find these naturally from the big gravestones that you come across in the world. They each have a chance of dropping a Wraith calling bell from them, which means even if you don't have a relic that has the effect that guarantees it, I highly recommend keeping an eye out for the gravestones when playing Revenant for a chance at the Wraith calling bell. All that said, this in itself is stronger than anything Revenant gets at level 1, and unless you get absurdly lucky on drops, this is the most powerful version of Revenant I've seen on day 1, just full stop. For day 2, this continues to work just fine, and you can even kill a Night Lord with it purely with the Wraith calling bell on Revenant if you have some Starlight shards to sustain you through it. But where it really starts to pick up steam is if you get any dormant powers or weapon passives that cause effects while you are walking. You can get things like Wraiths summon while walking, which I had here in this footage, but also dormant powers like Flame of Frenzy while walking and Deluge of Star Rain while walking, and all three of these trigger while we use the Wraith calling bell, as using that item while moving counts as going walking speed. So the more of these options you get, the more powerful you become, to the point that I had a setup based around this that was just obliterating bosses in a fraction of the time that I do normally in normal builds with stronger gear. Even in solo, I was having no problem with this, just bursting down everything I came across. And it really is as simple as keeping a summon active so they can draw aggro away from you, and then activating a buff from our relic choices as well, and then fire out Wraith calling bell shots as often as you are able to do. Any sort of FP regen worked into this as well makes it even more reliable long term for the longer fights too. But the point is that this is simply the best consistent method of a high damage to FP ratio option on Revenant, and you can get it right at the start of an expedition. That said, let's break down the relics that we are using on Revenant to make this happen, and the main one is just Wraith Calling Bell in possession at the start of the expedition. This can come on any color of relic, but the optimal setup that I've got going at least requires it as a green relic. In any case, you want to mix it with the small makeup brush for the power up while fighting alongside family effect, and the increased rune acquisition is just a great effect as a bonus as well. Then in your third slot, we've got another relic that is available in the shop after you beat the Night Aspect boss, the Grand Burning Scene with increased rune acquisition. Stone Sword Key in possession at the start of the expedition, which is great for some early runes, especially as you have great early boss killing ability in this setup, and then you also get a rune discount on shop purchases, which is especially good for things like if the merchant village spawns on the map, and then you can get a cheaper, really good talisman. That said, the main thing that you really want to focus on is just having the power increase when your family is around from the makeup brush. So you can use a different vessel if it gets you there, you can use different relics if it gets you there. Those are the effects that you really want. This is just what I believe to be the best version of it. Next up for our second build, we have one that is simple but undeniably effective, and a classic of Elden Ring really, which is Seppuku Executor. There are relics of every color that can drop with Seppuku on starting armament as an effect, and for those unfamiliar, Seppuku makes you stab yourself with your blade, and then for a short duration afterwards, the weapon has extra physical attack power, as well as significant bonus bleed status buildup. This is great for three separate reasons, of course. The first being that katanas as a weapon type are just great. Executor has a katana as his starting weapon, and so making his starting weapon stronger is purely a good thing. The weapon itself does have some bleed buildup on it naturally as a katana, but leaning into that even further through Seppuku makes the bleed procs relatively constant and consistent, which is especially useful for things like early bosses that you take on from around level 2 to 5, as it will chunk off large pieces of their health bar after every few attacks. And of course, some enemies are immune to bleed, and it doesn't help against those, but it does help for everything else. And even against things that are immune to bleed, you still get the physical attack increase too. Not to mention that because Executor has an S in arcane and dexterity scaling, this actually makes his weapon even more effective, because of course the S in arcane scaling scales the bleed buildup that you get from Seppuku as well. All that said, the third big main thing that we do for this as well is Executor's passive ability called Tenacity. This effect triggers when you recover from a status ailment, and it gives you around a 20% increase to your attack power and an increase to stamina recovery as well, for around 20 seconds after this activates. This ability counts as triggering when you suffer from blood loss, and so if you use Seppuku on yourself, you get the standard Seppuku increases, but you also get that 20% increased attack and the bonus stamina regeneration speed too if you do this on Executor specifically, and that's honestly a really big part of it. What makes this even stronger though is the way that weapon rarities work in Nightreign. You'll probably be aware at this point that if you find a blue weapon while playing the game, you need to be level 3 to use it. Same with purple weapons requiring level 7 and legendaries requiring level 10. This, however, does not apply to a weapon that is upgraded to being a higher rarity than it is by default. So because the starting weapon begins as a gray weapon, that means even if you upgrade it to purple or even a legendary quality, if you have the Crater Shifting Earth and manage to do this before level 10, you can still use the weapon properly. So one of my favorite things to do in this setup with Executor is just bum rush a mine right at the start and get a Smithing Stone 2. Then hit up a merchant as early as possible to pick up a Smithing Stone 1 and use their anvil to upgrade it twice. And with this you can end up with like a purple bleed katana that you can actively use properly right around level 3, which put simply is just a much stronger weapon than you are expected to have that early in your run, and that type of power can easily snowball very hard for the rest of the expedition. This one, I would say, is a less full run encompassing solution than Wraith Calling Bell Revenant, but it gives you such a ridiculous head start right from the get-go that it's easy to just sort of go with the flow for whatever source of endgame power you happen to be offered during a run, and using this just as a jump start for the first day and a half or so. But that said, you can totally defeat Night Lords even with just the purple starting weapon with Seppuku. There are just generally better options that you'll probably be offered before that point. All that said, let's talk about the relics that we're using for this setup. The main important one is any relic that has change-compatible armament skill to Seppuku at the start of an expedition. This comes on various color slots, so that makes it hard to recommend a specific vessel or secondary choices, but in an ideal world, if you got that effect on a green relic, then you could use the Spirit Shelter Grail with the 3 green slots, and then you could pair it with Knight of the Beast for stamina recovery on every attack, as well as the guaranteed partial HP restoration upon post-damage attacks relic that you can get guaranteed in the shop after you defeat the Night Aspect Expedition. If you don't have one in this color of the specific Seppuku relic, try to get in the partial HP restoration on post-damage attacks somewhere else if you have that on one of the randomly rolled relics, as that is just a super powerful effect in general. Otherwise, just use generic power increasing things like increased rune acquisition, which is always great, or generic stat increases or ultimate skill cooldown reductions to let you get more frequent access to the full heal from going beast mode. Then our final build for today is for Ironeye as a character, the Archer, and this is a super duper endgame setup, as the main thing that we are using as our sort of damage engine is a relic that you get from defeating the Night Aspect, the final boss Night Lord Healstore. This relic that you get from him, Knight of the Lord, gives you a random affinity effect on your weapon after you swap weapons. It boosts your attack power with added affinity attacks in general, and it also boosts attack power after switching weapons, all of which combo together quite specifically. This can be used on any Nightfarer, but I view it as being the best on Ironeye specifically because it seems to be a flat gain, sort of like applying a grease, and with how bows work and with Ironeye's damage output at level 1, a basic bow shot hits for 35 in the sparring grounds, but if you use this relic and just swap to your hand and then back to the bow, it suddenly hits for 53. That is 50% more damage than it would be doing otherwise. And if you want to talk about a good way to have consistently stronger starts to your runs, a 50% damage increase at level 1 is a pretty massive way to do so. But then this extends to being even more useful as well. The main way to continue to evolve this setup during an active expedition is to actually pick up multiple different bows, especially if you find one that adds holy damage to attacks or adds magic damage to attacks, or any of the affinities specifically as passives. These will all get bonus damage from the Knight of the Lord talisman effect that boosts added affinity attack power, and if you get 3 bows in your right hand slots, you can then just sort of start to rotate between the 3. If they are of equal power to each other, or at least close to it, you can just one at a time swap from one bow to the next, then each time the glowing affinity effect goes away, swap to a new bow. If you have one bow that is particularly stronger than the others, you can just do a triple swap, as in swap 3 times in a row to go back to the same weapon to reapply the buff whenever it drops off. A fun way to extend this is if you have status bows as well, because you can use a poison bow with an added affinity until you apply the poison, then you can swap off to another bow, so on and so forth. The whole point is weapon swapping, and with a large portion of the damage coming from the added affinity effect itself, the actual weapons that you find don't really matter that much as long as they are bows. They help, but you have a high source of guaranteed damage that works with any attacks you could do. The extra special part of this one as well is that it is even stronger for anyone who has good knowledge of Elden Ring enemy weaknesses, because of course, as this gives you a random affinity as added attack power on the weapon, meaning one of the 4 between magic, fire, holy, or lightning, you, if you know what an enemy's weaknesses are by heart, can just sort of keep swapping weapons until you roll the correct bonus affinity type, and then just start attacking them for a bunch of bonus damage, because oftentimes a weaker weapon with the correct affinity matchup is actually stronger than a strong weapon that is the wrong affinity. This extends even further to the Night Lords themselves, where their weakness is very explicitly mentioned on the expedition launch screen. So if you're going against the Night Aspect as an example, you know that he's going to be weak to holy damage, so you want to weapon swap until you get the holy affinity bonus on a bow. Then you can start blasting for lots of bonus damage that matches his weaknesses, which will cause the bonus holy stagger as well, and reduce his damage as well as a result, and this is just really important for Night Lords, which get extra effects when you use the correct damage type. That said, for the actual relic setup on Ironeye, I'm using Ironeye's Goblet, the red, blue, yellow vessel. In the blue slot is where you've got the Knight of the Lord relic itself. Then in the yellow slot, I like to use the Knight of the Wise relic, the one from Noster, the Sentient Pest, mostly for the starting armament inflicts poison, and the Poison and Rot in vicinity increases attack power. This lets your starting weapon have good damage still because of the added affinity effects from the other relic, but still also apply poison buildup, which is a great thing to have against bosses, but also just increase increase your attack power in general whenever it applies, so this is just great as a whole. Then the third relic slot, the main thing that you want from it is improved bow attack power, and this is just a really strong effect if you plan on using exclusively bows. Mine here also has Ironeye Arced Charge activation, adds poison effect, and this makes Ironeye's ult be able to apply poison buildup too, which lets you still activate the bonus damage and poison activation, even if you decide to ditch your starting armament later into the run too. But that's just sort of an extra bonus synergy. It's the improved bow attack power that really matters on this slot specifically. That just about does it for today then, everyone. 3 really consistent, strong builds for Nightreign, each on a different character and each for a different playstyle entirely. I hope you enjoy using them if you try these out for yourself in the game, and hopefully they make your expeditions even easier and more consistent as well. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.